Thank you for joining us tonight for our hybrid event, whether you're joining us in person or remotely via Zoom. We thank you for taking the time to listen to this important topic. We have a hybrid event, and so we want to encourage as much interactivity as possible. We have Ani, who is managing the Zoom event, and if you put questions as they come up, either in the chat box. It's hard to do this without looking at my screen. If you put the questions either in the chat box or also in the Q&A, then Ani will bring those to our attention and let us know how things are going. And please, we encourage questions as we go along. We're here to really be a support for you as parents. I know that when a few years back, there was a death at my kids' school, and it was really tough to know how to best support them. They knew the student, and even if they hadn't known the student, they had friends of friends who knew. And today, kids, their communities are so interconnected between school districts and different schools that when a student dies, you feel it. More so, over the past few years, we've had other opportunities for grief to enter into our lives. And so tonight, I am very, very pleased to be able to introduce to you two amazing professionals who have significant experience in working with children and working with grief. Tonight we have a conversation with Kristie Neklason of Youth Eastside Services and with Sonja Whitake of the Healing Center. I'm going to let them do a quick intro and take it away.
Thank you very much, Val. And I'm not sure that you introduced yourself, but we're here thanks to Val and the work of Balance in Mind, part of the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, and supporting parents not only in the Lake Washington School District, but in our larger community. So I'm Kristie Neklason, and I'm currently the Director of School-Based Behavioral Health Services for Youth Eastside Services, which means that we have folks who are dually trained, most of them, some of them only trained in mental health and or substance use in the middle schools in the Lake Washington School District, supporting the evergreen behavioral health social workers with substance abuse prevention intervention at the high schools, and we do suicide risk assessments also at the elementary school level. So really trying to kind of be there where the kids are. Many years ago, I worked in the schools in the Lake Washington School District and have been really blessed to see kind of that sense from way back then of how integrated services really work better. And when you can do that in partnership between the community and the schools and with parents, you really have a chance to, I think, influence and really equip our children to deal with what life hands them. And Lake Washington School District has really embraced that and really helped to move the needle on doing that. And I have with me this evening Sonja Whitake, and I'm going to let Sonja introduce herself, and then we're going to begin our conversation.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Sonja Whitake, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I used to do something very similar to you. I worked at a big agency in South Seattle, where we were in schools and doing the same kind of work, mental health counseling and interventions and safety planning and that kind of thing. So I've gotten to work with kids for a long time. And it was a childhood grief experience that brought me.
I'm going to switch mics with you.
I'm going to say anything again, or okay. So it was a childhood grief experience that brought me to this field. So I am now at the Healing Center, and we are a small nonprofit that does group services for kids and adults that have lost someone important in their lives. And that's what we do. It's grief
All day long. Well, and I think that grief is really a universal experience that is shared by really every human being at some point in their life. Also, a lot of evidence that even some mammals and some other animals share that grief. And part of that is that if you are a healthy human being, you connect with others. You care about things, you invest in them, you have the ability to engage in relationships, not only with people, but sometimes it's with dreams or it's with places, systems, many different things. And because of that, I think it's that idea of not being afraid of grief, but really re-recognizing it as part of life. And as I had said before, I think oftentimes as parents we want to protect our children, but I think we need to think more about equipping our children and how do we equip them for whatever at their life stage are their kinds of challenges, what is sort of part of that common human experience. And when we know something is definitely going to touch them, how do we equip them to be able to manage that? And given that universality, Sonja, can you say a little bit about kind of just grief and the grieving process and what that looks like overall, and then maybe we can move into some specifics from there?
Sure. Yes, if we love or connect, you will grieve because it is very one absolute thing about life is that it will end eventually. And some people experience it younger, and some people don't have to experience it until they're an adult, but you will experience it. And really, it's a blessing in many ways because it means that you care about someone enough that you miss them and that you are affected by their loss.
So really affirming that preciousness of life, and I know you and I chatted about this a little bit the other day, but sometimes we do find that missing these days, and so it's a really good reminder that in our pain, in our grief, that is in itself affirming the preciousness and importance of life.
It is, and our world has really lost touch with grief and the death experience because of technology and because of where our society has advanced. People don't usually die at home anymore. Some people, because of hospice, do get to return home and have a safe, medically supported death at home. Some people choose that. Many people still do not. And so usually people do not die at home. And 100 years ago, everyone did, or, so it was very, very normal to see somebody you love, somebody you lived with die, and that doesn't happen very often anymore. And so it's a very foreign experience and therefore more jarring and less familiar. And when it does happen, we don't have the same experiences and normalcy of it. We don't see it happen to our neighbors and our friends. And we have to something we have to relearn and experience in a new way.
Right. And I mentioned to you earlier, I was having a conversation with my adult daughter and kind of reflections on sort of grief and the whole idea of kind of being equipped for things. And she said a couple of things that I think were really very useful kind of for parents to hear, which go along with what you're saying, Sonja, which is that importance of knowing that this is a common human experience. Because sometimes, particularly if you're very young, or if you just have had a very protected life or been kind of around people who have had, it may just feel so foreign to you, and you may think, this is me alone, nobody else has had this experience. It feels just so odd and so strange, and not know then how to connect with others. And then there's the reality of that is actually that everybody could reach out to right there absolutely has had or is going to have this experience, and yet you may feel so isolated in that. And so again, on that theme of rather than the small children, and my mother died when my daughter was 5, and so it was sort of an early experience for her, right? And not many other people were going through that. And it also brings up that kind of developmental thing. And I'm not saying that, you know, I dealt with that the best that was at all possible either, right? So we go on to learn kind of from things, but just in her recollection, it was balancing out the, everybody experiences this, but not having that be dismissive. On the other hand, validating your individual experience about how kind of sad this is. But it really made me think about the times when you just inevitably would have been included in the loss and the grief experience.
Exactly. And I think what we were going to talk about a little bit is if we're going to help our kids. One of the first places to start is thinking about ourselves and what has happened to us, what is our grief story. So I would encourage those listening to think about what their early grief experience was. If you lost someone when you were younger, or even as a young adult, what the first loss experience was like for you, and what happened that was helpful, what happened that was not helpful. Are there things that you wish somebody had done for you? What kind of messages did you get? How was it explained to you? What kinds of things, what kinds of meaning-making things were done? So sometimes there's cultural or faith experiences that come around a loss by death, and those can have a big influence on how you make sense of it. So I would encourage people to just kind of reflect on that for a minute, and if there's anyone that would like to share their experience, we'd love to hear that, and we can also talk about these experiences. So when I was 12, my grandfather died, and he had had cancer, and he was my favorite person, and I'm pretty sure I was his. I must have been, right? We were very close, and he knew he was dying. He had had cancer, he had a slow cancer, so he had known for about 3 years that he had it, and had been very intentional about spending even more time. Our family was already close, but spend even more time together. Organized several trips that the whole family went on, and so went into his death with being even closer than perhaps would have been if it was a typical relationship. For example, I was closer to him than I was my other grandfather, who I was also close to. When he died, my parents went to the hospital, and I was sent with my younger siblings to my other grandparents' house. And I remember being incensed that I was left out of that process. I thought, how could he do something so important as die without me? I mean, it was like kind of inconceivable. Of course, this is part of the kind of magical thinking that we have around death, that we have some control, or that there's, of course, he was probably unconscious by then, whatever, all those things.
We really want that sense of control.
We do.
Because we want to make it not happen, right?
Exactly.
We want to change it back. People want that sense of control so badly sometimes that they will take on a world of guilt that's really not based in actuality, feeling like if the if-onlys that you hear about, I think that takes many forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember kind of being left out. I felt quite left out. And, then there's lots of things are different when somebody close dies. You know, there's this schedule is different. You don't go to school. Maybe I don't think my dad was home as much because he was taking care of things, and I just felt left out. I couldn't believe that all this was happening and that they didn't need me to do something very important. And so that was kind of one of my primary feelings, is that I was left out of it, and that I wasn't given much opportunity to share how I was feeling. I had to process it alone, I felt like. My parents loved me, they took care of me. So it's not like they were, but they didn't, they were taking care of themselves, right? And they were doing what they thought was right. A year later, a very close friend, she's like my piano teacher, and so another adult that I've been very close to, also died. And my mom must have gotten it. I'm sure I didn't talk about it with her, but that time when that person died, she took me to the hospital as like after they knew she was going to die for sure. And she took me to the hospital to say goodbye. And it was somewhat traumatic to see this person who I had known was very healthy and active, you know, in a coma and not doing well, you know. But it was also very, very healing, and it made me feel important, which is important for kids, and it made me feel like I was part of things. And I will never forget that process of being able to go and say goodbye to this person who was very close to me, and be part of that goodbye process.
To feel included in that.
Yeah.
You know, that's so interesting that you shared that story, and we'll see what other folks have to share. But when I was reflecting on this, I also lost a grandfather around that same time. And what I remember was, you know, partly being at the memorial service and having flowers that I really, really wanted to have either, you know, on the coffin or in the coffin or something. And that being so important to me, and being allowed to, you know, having adults who facilitated that for me, and who also let me be there, because I remember a great grandparent passing away, and children weren't, it was like they were deemed too young to go, you know, too kind of vulnerable or fragile to do that. But if you do that, what is the message that you're sending to your child, right? And so just that feeling, really, I echo that, of being included, having an important role to play. And that, of course, is an important thing for children in their development, you know, across the board in any way. You know, it's like, where do I fit in? How do I belong? What do I contribute? How do I contribute?
So that's our first takeaway, is that if possible, include your children in the process. Be honest with them. Don't use euphemistic language, especially the younger the child, the less helpful that is. So if a child is told someone is lost or that they've passed away, that can be very confusing. What does that mean? If somebody's lost, we go find them. If somebody has passed what? Where did they go? So it's very important to say they have died. Their body does not work anymore. They, you know, be very concrete.
And I know people are concerned, parents particularly, around, you know, passing on sort of their values, their belief system, their culture, their religion in those ways. But I think that you can do both of those things, right? You can talk about it as this reality of what's happened without kind of those euphemisms, and then share, these are beliefs that I have, or these are beliefs that your family has, or we're going to participate in these rituals that are part of kind of, you know, our culture and our way of kind of being sad, or, you know, marking a death and moving forward. So it's, again, not having it be one or another. And I think it's important to kind of own that when we're sharing, even with our younger children, that these are our beliefs, these are our family's beliefs, these are our community's beliefs, our culture's beliefs, that's fine. You're not saying you have to believe this. The child has to kind of go through their own experiences, and we're kind of those things through. There's a kind of a normative process for that, you know, different stages. But there's certainly nothing wrong with sharing kind of what it is that you believe and how it is that you mark the passage of death and what it means to you and the family. And having that be something that the child knows and participates in.
Yeah, rituals are really important. I think it is not unusual that death is one of the places in life that there is almost universal ritual. I mean, communities have, they don't have the same rituals, but almost every community has a ritual for that. If you find you don't, for some reason, maybe you aren't part of it, there's a lot of people who are far away from their communities, things like that, or no longer attend like a faith community, make a ritual, do something, have a candlelight vigil, have some kind of experience that is different, is separate from daily life that everyone can participate in. That because rituals are a very important part of knowing that and starting a grief process.
And that can be very simple. I know that we had talked before about you know, a young child and maybe losing a classmate and being able to help them kind of name their feelings. So that kind of idea of kind of that, if you can be aware of it, you can name it, then again, you're starting to feel less overwhelmed and more like you're having that experience and you are working through that experience. Even if you don't have words to kind of say that, can be important. But what you were talking about, Sonja, as I recall, was having the child think about what were all those things that you really noticed about, maybe liked or thought were funny, or maybe even found irritating about, you know, the child who had passed away that they had known. And I think making it very real for a young child in particular, and that's very concrete. But I think that would also be really helpful with older youth as well.
Oh, honestly, I think it's really important to talk openly about the person who has died. And the person who has died doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be just positive things. It can be all the things about them. So, you know, so of course there's always the things that we're going to miss, but it can also be good to talk about, I guess it's another child's hard, but if they, like, on a fight with them, like you were saying, maybe there's something about that friend that wasn't positive sometimes. Being honest about that as well is important because if you don't talk about it, it seems taboo, and that's not helpful.
Well, and I think it just feeds right into that guilt place too, right? And a lot of mistaken kinds of thoughts about it. And when I'm listening to you talking about even affirming having an argument or, you know, oh, it was irritated the heck out of me when, you know, she or he did this or that, or, you know, really just felt like I was never going to be able to forgive them, is what you're seeing is relationships are multidimensional. I mean, they're not just simple, you know, you're either going to make me happy or that's it kind of thing, right? And that's the complexity and that richness again of kind of human beings. Do we have some people who are willing to share? That is awesome.
Yes, we have a comment that came in. I remember when my dad was sick for 3 years and right before my graduation from high school, there was a great deal of anger that I dealt with for quite a while. How could a parent support a child who is dealing with grief and anger when that is the biggest emotion that they themselves are dealing with?
Well, I think anger is one of the most common responses to grief or part of grief for a couple of reasons. One is that there is lots to be angry about. For example, if you've just graduated from high school and your dad dies, the natural attention that would be on you is not on you. You've worked all these years and graduation is your time, and the focus is not on you. And that's, you can say, well, that's really selfish, but no, that's normal, of course. This is your time, and now the family is focused on something else, maybe only partially on you. So there's a good reason right there to be angry. Another reason anger is really common is that anger is an emotion that is kind of a cover for lots of other emotions that are a little harder to express. So it is much easier in general to be angry than it is to be sad, or embarrassed, or frustrated with another person, or scared. So a lot of times a child that is acting angry is actually experiencing something else. And so it's allowing them to be angry and hopefully work through that to some extent, and in a place where they're a little more calm. Be like, what else is going on? What else are you feeling?
What if I can't channel the feeling of calm because I'm also going through the same grief and anger?
We kind of think like being a parent can be super hard, obviously. And being a parent when you are grieving and a child is grieving is particularly hard. So the first thing to do is just take a deep breath and take care of yourself. Know that you are not going to be perfect in this moment, and you don't need to be perfect in this moment. But it is an opportunity, in my opinion, to connect and to provide your child with a healthy opportunity for communication. And you are probably going to be the one who's the closest. Sometimes you can't be, or sometimes sometimes kids come up with stuff when they're in the most random places. People who do a lot of therapy with kids say that the best time to talk with them is in the car, because they're like this,
Side by side,
and they're like, I wonder if Dad still loves me, that kind of thing. What do you mean? Well, if he's dead, does he still love me? And that's the kind of time.
Tell me more about that.
Exactly. You can have, and you're not expecting it, you're on your way to Target. That's, you're thinking about your shopping list, and all of a sudden this thing comes out. But again, taking a deep breath, trying not to react, not worrying about things being right. And so sometimes kids ask like really concrete questions about death and ask things like, did all their blood come out of them, and where did it go on the floor? And that's not maybe the kind of thing you want to talk about at dinner, but allow them to ask those questions. And you probably don't know, but if you do know, explain as best you can. They're already thinking about it, so to elaborate or explore it with them is not going to make it worse.
Keeping your act together and thinking, because there's a lot of kind of reflection that is oftentimes necessary as a parent. I mean, I always think everybody needs a parent buddy or a parent coach, whoever that maybe could be in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a professional, it could be an older mentor, a parent, your parent, whoever you may have. But if you can cultivate that relationship with somebody, because again, parenting is difficult, and there's often things like you're doing on the spur of the moment that you're kind of like, oh my, I can remember those times in the car and the kids are in back of me and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like, how am I gonna do this, and so having somebody that you can talk things through, that supports your thinking it through when there is a time, is going to help you when you're in those moments of right now. And also, I mean, you need to have those times, places, persons that support your self-care. And everything is really difficult when you're grieving. And I mean, sometimes in grief, we really are in an altered state of mind. So I'm going to echo again with that, giving yourself permission as an individual, if you are, closely impacted by this, and then you're trying to support your child, you absolutely have to have that awareness, and you have to have some grace for yourself about what you're going through, and I think you need to realize you may not be doing your best thinking. Who is it that can not only help and support you, and how do you do that, but how can you get other people who can support your child? Who are the other adults in your child's world who can just either be with them for a time, or who could kind of handle the conversations about kind of awkward stuff? I think sometimes getting a pause and sort of inviting kind of some time. So when you were saying that comment at the dinner table and saying, well, maybe we don't want to talk about that at the dinner table, but rather than shutting that down, maybe saying, hey, after dinner, let's write down all the questions that you can think of about death or about what happened. And then we could kind of start working on those together, because then you could invite other people into that as well.
And I think those are great ways to help parents think about it with younger kids and maybe with older kids. But I certainly remember my daughter was a teenager, and when there was someone she knew at school, although not closely, who died, she didn't talk about it much. How do you work with a teenager? How do you develop that conversation when oftentimes they just want to come in and shut the door into their room?
Yes, and that's again that kind of spidey sense about like, is that kind of the normal teenage? I do really need my space. I think one thing for parents is, don't expect your teen, even if you did the absolutely best and right thing at the moment, in that moment to appreciate that you were doing that. And I say that from the point of view of someone who was parenting a teen. Now it's like a decade later, and sometimes I hear things like, wow, I really think kids need to be like, we need to talk to them about how can they manage that if they're having a lot of stirred up emotions in that. Like they need to take some rest. They need to go for a walk. How could they think about it? Helping them to kind of realize sort of the right size of something. So again, it's like, teens feel that immediacy of it. It's like, this is all that's happening, and it's happening forever, and it's always going to be this way. It's just huge, right? And again, now we're back into this tricky thing, I think, particularly with teens. Hopefully, you lay down some foundations already that have helped to kind of equip them, right? And then it's balancing out the validation of, I see that you're suffering, or I wonder what you're experiencing. I heard that this happened. I don't know how that's impacting you. This is maybe, you might even say, this is kind of how it's affecting me. And be brief about that. But what you're doing is you're saying it's okay to talk about that, and you're also saying it's a normal thing to be experiencing that. Here's some ways that maybe I deal with that, or someone else does it that way. Making those kind of suggestions and observations. So it is a little bit more of the kind of side by side in the car talk. So you're making kind of those brief kind of comments, observations, and you're inviting, tell me about that, or if you want to talk about that.
I was at a grief conference not too long ago, and the speaker said the most important thing you can do is listen. And she said, if people did more listening and less talking, it would be much better for us. But that would be my overall thing is listen. It's not the time to teach necessarily. It's the time to be present, to make space for whatever it is that they need to talk about or not talk about. Reinforcing supporting regular schedule and regular meals and keeping those kinds of routines can be helpful. Giving them opportunities to to do special things, so maybe exploring if there's something that they would like to do to honor their friend, you know, making space for that. And I can imagine, like, imagining my daughter when she was a teenager, if I said something like that, she probably would be like, whatever. But if you plant the seed and say, you know, if there's something you'd like to do to honor your friend, and there's a way I can help you make that happen, let me know. And you'll get the whatever. But a few hours later, or a couple of days later, you may get a, you know, I was thinking about it, and you know, maybe we could, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. And I think though that it's important to name it. So that's where things start, right? Is to be able to say, like, for example, today, there was a shooting at a school in Seattle. And I don't know all the facts about that, but one of my staff working in a school, well, actually a couple of my staff working in schools today, when I was talking to them, this had come up. And one of them forwarded to me, you know, the principal's message and communication that they were going to send out to their school community about this happening, recognizing what I think Valerie was saying at the beginning, which is that those boundaries of kind of your school, your neighborhood with the digital world don't really exist anymore. So we can kind of think people are going to be impacted by that. And so just saying, I heard that, you know, and I heard that people were talking about that at school, or just opening, maybe leaving a little space there if they want to say something. Like, you don't have to go on and on. It's just naming it and then leaving that kind of space there.
And in these kinds of incidents that happen at school, there's not only the actual loss of the person, which of course is something they're gonna have to face, but there's also a loss of safety, a loss of shattering of that sense that you're okay, you know, because
Right, the proximity is starting to get awfully close.
Yeah, and that's a whole other.
And those are kind of part of those feelings that you can talk about as well.
And that brings up the question that we had earlier, which was when something like the shooting today happens, or if a student dies in school, you often don't know what really happened. And, you know, your child says, well, Mom, Dad, why did they do this? Why did that guy shoot someone else? You know, there aren't the complete set of information for us to make sense of it. How do we handle that that situation and talking with our kids?
Well, I personally think it's okay to say I don't know. And there, you know, that things happen that we don't get answers for, or we won't be able to completely understand. And also, I will do everything I can to keep you safe. I will do everything I can to try to help you make sense of it, but I also don't know, and that's okay.
And that's part of reality again. It's part of that complexity again, that things will happen that we don't fully understand. And I'm thinking about what's going on for us when we're so frustrated by not having all those facts and details and can get so caught up in it. Some of that, I think, does go back to that kind of wishing and hoping that we had more control than we do. If somehow I understood exactly how that happened, I could maybe, you know, I think there is like a little bit of that magical thinking about going back into the past. And we know younger children do that, but I think that also youth and young adults and us as adults do sometimes fall into these kinds of thinkings under the surface where we just want so badly for it to be different, to it not have happened, to not ever happen again, that we start thinking, if only, and we could go back in time, then we had all those details and we could change that trajectory. Or we could keep ourselves safe, we could keep our loved ones safe, if only we knew all of those kinds of pieces and facts. And I'm not sure that that is totally true, that if we did have kind of that omniscience, that we would be able to do that. But I know for a fact that real life, you just don't usually have that. And so it is kind of coming to some sort of acceptance around that while acknowledging how difficult it is.
It can also be an opportunity for activism. And so if something happens that doesn't make sense or is, really threatens the way you understand things should be, it's a time that a family can come together and do something that they hope will make their world better. There's been a lot of kids in school shootings that have become really vocal and helpful in that whole world and helping their schools figure out ways to make them safer and take action.
Right, yeah, and some of that I think goes to then if you, knowing your child, thinking about sort of what are their inclinations, right? So they may be very artistic, maybe, but very quiet and not like to share, out loud in words. But maybe they might be invited to draw, or might provide them with, like that art with heart. They have a wonderful sort of journal they can illustrate and things like that. And you also looking at doing some art therapy kinds of things, specifically around grief. Maybe they're a dancer, maybe they're an athlete. Maybe they do like to speak out publicly. Maybe they, really are very extroverted and have a whole bunch of friends and they want to get them kind of organized. Maybe they like to write. But thinking about what's their inclination, and again, this goes back to how can they participate? How can they make an impact? It's getting back some of that sense of the loss of control and safety when we can take action to influence kind of our world around us.
Yeah, doing something
Right.
is a real part of healing.
Right. And I want to reinforce though that if that is not your child's orientation, we don't want to be like, well, you should, join this cause, or you should be making speeches or doing that. I don't want to be putting something on students, or you want to elicit from them from what their strengths are and their orientations are.
Yeah, and I invite doing something.
Oh, yes.
Writing a poem.
Exactly, yes, putting it into action, drawing it, yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions we were asked earlier is, what does grief look like for a teen? We've heard about these stages of grief, and do teens go through those?
Well, everybody sort of does. The stages of grief that were written, denial, anger, bargaining,
Sadness and depression.
depression and acceptance. Those were actually part of a study of people who were dying. So it was people coming to terms with their own death. So they have been normalized into a grief experience, but it has also been pretty much acknowledged that people don't go through those stages in order, and it's not that simple.
I always think about those as sort of being kind of a little bit of a infrastructure that you can kind of hang your thinking on or hang your experiences on. They reflect some of the common experiences in grief, but grief is ultimately both shared, universal, and very individual.
Yeah, everybody's grief is completely individual. People grieve in their own way and in their own time. And a grieving teen in particular, but grieving children and teens look like every other child and teen. They don't necessarily look sad. They don't necessarily look like anything's different. That might be because it's not, because it's, what's for dinner? Oh yeah, my friend died. What's for dinner again? That's very normal. And so to be thinking to yourself, why are they sad? Is because they're not sad right now. But then why do they burst into tears? I don't know, you know, again, at Target, because they're in the aisle that they and their friend used to buy lip gloss in. You know, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, we used to buy lip gloss together right here. That's what it looks like. It's completely random, and it's all okay. The kid is not losing it if they all of a sudden are hit by a big wave of emotion. Neither is an adult losing it when they're hit by a big wave of emotion. That's just the way it is. Life can go on very normally, and then it can hit them in an unusual and unexpected way.
Yeah, so I think having your team realize that there is that kind of coming and going of different kinds of emotions, that anger is a very common emotion. So I think sometimes people feel badly about being angry because maybe they're angry at the person who passed away, and then it's like, how can I be angry at them? That's so unfair. And so now they've got a secondary issue on top of just, no, it's very natural to feel angry. And maybe you can name kind of what some of those things are that are, you know, leading to the anger. And so having them know that there's all these possible kinds of reactions and feelings, sadness being the one that I think is most expected. But again, you know, people may not experience that, and they may not experience that for a long time. There's also that kind of, when I think about kind of that bargaining from the stages, I think about the kind of thing what we were talking about before about if only we knew, or if only we could have, or if only I had this control, and it kind of feeding into that sort of wishfulness of wanting it to be different and wanting to have control that we don't have. And then checking out to kind of like, you know, sometimes people feel guilt, and like, you know, that can be kind of an important thing. I don't know, I kind of see therapeutic moments really just either as a parent, I did that, and as, you know, just in general, where it's kind of like something happens and then you might say, oh, you know, that made me think about kind of when sometimes when people, you know, have a loss that they want so badly to have made it differently that they just feel like they should have had control, and there's all these shoulds and there's this guilt in that. You know, kind of have you experienced that, or have any of your friends experienced that? And if they say, no, it's like, okay, we can move on. But creating those opportunities for sharing, discussion, action, marking the death, tuning in, I think, to see, because I think sometimes parents are like, well, my child doesn't seem to be feeling anything at all or reacting to this, so I'm really kind of worried about that, because are they just kind of hiding it and stuffing it away? What do you think about that? I mean, what might parents do in that instance?
Well, they might be hiding it away. Probably not. That's not
So
the
the
most
parents might
likely
check
thing.
themselves first.
But if they are hiding it away, you might want to ask yourself, why might they be doing that? Is it because it's not okay to tell me? Or it's not, there's something going on in their circle, in a little world, that it's not okay? So I would, if you can, step back a little bit and explore that. Easier said than done.
Right,
I realize,
it's that kind of thoughtful reflection again, where the parent buddy coach comes in.
yeah, exactly. Think about what your kid's like. Do you have a kid who usually tells you everything and it's kind of a running monologue about what's ever on their mind, and all of a sudden it stops? That, you know, what's going on? Or do you have a kiddo that's doesn't share much in the first place? You know, you have to pick and pry everything out of them. Well, of course you're gonna have to pick and pry this out too. And that's a place where you know your child, you have done this in other ways, so I would use the same skills you learned. If you have a very introverted child, maybe you've learned to put little info bombs out there, you know, and say, you know, so you say, wow, when I was little, I lost a friend, and I remember having a hard time telling anybody, but I was really sad for a long time. And what helped me was finding a place to talk about them. You know, make something up. It doesn't, I don't even know if it has to be factual, but, you know, try to find something that will connect with your child and help them talk.
Right, and you just kind of put it out there.
Yeah.
It's an offering, they may not pick it up right in that moment, right? Yeah, and I think you're onto something in terms of where parents are trying to decide, does my child need professional support and help here? Is there something, am I reading your mind? Okay.
Yes, that was my question. I didn't know to go on to the next.
But is sort of, I will say like, okay, so you know your child and sort of their baseline, right? And I'm always like, okay, is there too much intensity, too much of a behavior? Is there too little of something? And I mean, I'm kind of thinking those drastic kind of changes from baseline. Now, everybody kind of fluctuates somewhat, right? But if you're kind of going way out there, so all of a sudden there's like way too many new distressing behaviors, and there's way too much new isolation beyond the kind of just normal teenage amount of that. And so really considering those things and then kind of sitting with that and thinking about that for a little bit, running that by someone that is a good listener and sounding board. I certainly think if there are behaviors where your child is harming themselves or kind of in danger in some way, some of those are kind of out there things like they may be cutting themselves or really engaging in risky behaviors, which is not a totally unheard of response sometimes to a big and upsetting kind of loss. And some of that sometimes has to do with like, if I put myself at risk, I'm proving that I'm tough, courageous, strong, I can overcome this. I mean, there's kind of a little twist on that kind of thing. And I think sometimes young people don't really realize that they're engaging in those kinds of behaviors. And so sometimes they need a little reflection. So like the concerned parent says, I've noticed this, and this that are different from what used to, you know, be kind of part of your behavior. I'm noticing this. That makes me concerned. You know, I would love to kind of hear from you, kind of your perspective about those things. I don't want to make assumptions about them and kind of leave some, you know, opening for that. If you cannot talk to me, let's think about who are kind of some of those safe, supportive adults in your life. We might, or let's find someone who can. And so kind of making these sorts of offers there, trying to stay home. You got to deal with kind of your own fears and anxieties around that, right? Because that's going to come up. And then there is this kind of sort of, oh, I'm going to forget the name of it. It's sort of like kind of mirrored regulation, right? It's like, so I can calm myself when things are kind of really up here, and I can bring myself down. The other people around me are much more likely to be able to do that as well. And I think that happens in the moment. And I also think that that can happen in that larger situation, right? So there is that ability to kind of model, not that you don't feel anything, and not that you're not rattled, and not that you're not, you know, concerned in that, but that, hey, I am feeling these things, and we can address these things as well.
Yeah, grief can look like depression, but depression lasts much longer and would be treated differently. So
Too long, that's
yeah.
too long, we get the twos in there, yeah.
Right,
Too
right.
long, too little, too much, yeah.
And grief is not usually persistent, like in every moment of every day kind of thing. It is usually a wave. And I want to say usually because everyone is different, but I think what you'll find with grief is that's different perhaps than depression is that for, you know, let's pick on depression for a minute, but depression would be persistent sleep disruption, depressed mood, changes in appetite, and those things consistent for several weeks. Grief might be, I don't feel like eating tonight, and because I'm really sad about Dad. But a couple days later, running around the playground, having a great time, and can I, how much pizza can I have tonight? So there's something biological about depression, whereas grief is certainly physiological and in your body, but not persistent in the same way.
See a little bit of increased anxiety too, maybe around doctors or.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah,
Parent was
absolutely.
sick or something.
Yeah, a lot of people report like if there was an illness related death, going to the hospital again can be really reactivate your experience there. Going to the doctor, like going to the doctor's office and having to re-experience those conversations.
Yes, so again, the question was about kind of having increased anxiety related to something that's connected to the loss. And again, I think that naming it and helping to bring it to awareness is always such a helpful starting point. Because sometimes that's all that's necessary, really, is like, oh, that's what's going on, and that's what I'm experiencing, rather than the second guessing and kind of, thinking whatever they're thinking in their heads, and then you're kind of worried about it, and just saying, I noticed that ever since, was a parent passed away, or a friend who was sick, and or a negative experience, maybe it was something that happened at school, right? Is that ever since then, you seem to kind of want to avoid that, or you seem to get upset when you get near that, or it even comes up in conversation. And that's not uncommon again, that should happen, because it's sort of like you're trying to defend against having all those negative bad feelings again, right? And then I can go on to say that's normal, and it's important kind of to work that through in some way, because avoidance as a life tactic really doesn't work very well, right? And I know, believe me, I'm not going north of 145th, no way, or hospital's not my favorite place. I've had many long illnesses in the family. And once had a friend be angry at me because I didn't come to visit them when they were in the hospital. I had to kind of go, oh, sorry, I did just really avoid that. I really don't like to go to hospitals, and this is kind of why. So raising our awareness and then kind of seeing what can we do to work that through if it's interfering with our kind of day-to-day life.
And one of the questions that came up was, if we have heard, in that rumor mill, the parent network, that a student died by suicide, or as is unfortunately more common these days, of fentanyl poisoning, how do we broach that with our kids without, will we trigger them?
Well, no, the common, we're not going to talk about suicide a lot, except to say the common understanding amongst therapists and mental health world now is that you don't not talk about it in the concern that you might plant the seed, that they'll get the idea. The idea is already out there, so it is important to talk about it and be honest about it. Suicide is difficult and it is scary, and so I want to acknowledge that. I would also encourage a parent to be honest, to attempt to not stigmatize it any more than it already is. So to not say, oh, what a terrible thing to do to your parents, how selfish of them to do that. Some of those things that we probably very much are feeling in many ways, right? I mean, it is a very, very painful thing. But to just be honest that it is very sad, and a person that chooses that is in a very difficult place and didn't see a way out, and we don't know the answers. Don't try to suggest you do know the answers.
We don't know
You
what
don't
they
know.
were thinking exactly,
Exactly.
their feeling or their experience was. Yeah, and I think, again, particularly with teens, it's creating that space again for what are they thinking about that? What are their kinds of thoughts? How is that landing on them? These are some common kinds of thoughts or experiences. Do they relate to any of those? And then I think there is opportunities again. So it's again, kind of keeping that in mind, or sometimes often the most difficult situations do present us with a lot of opportunities for learning, connecting, and growing. And around the fentanyl poisonings, I think there's a space for just like, what do you know about this? I mean, it's like, tell me kind of what you know, and making sure that there's access to accurate information. I think that would be true about death by suicide as well.
Can I ask quickly? I know we're talking about at the moment, teens unemployed.
I'll repeat the question.
How do we support our younger children, so maybe elementary school and younger, who they can't process it as much as, say, teens who have a little bit more maturity and a little bit more worldly experience?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like we had a situation in our family when my grandmother died. I was older. I understood a bit more. My sister was younger. They excluded her to a point. To this day, she still brings it up. We want to give information. We want to be honest, but parents go to a protective mode that they don't want to. So now I have a friend who has her cousin passed away, 35, young children, the mother's estate, the kids can't, they understand, but they don't understand. So she's trying to support, but doesn't probably have the language. They've tried to make suggestions to go to the healing centre, but the family are wanting to know, how do they support the younger children in language and grief and processing that?
So,
advice?
Yeah, so the question is, or repeated, is mostly about with young children in particular, how do you support them? And part of that was sort of not kind of giving into or encouraging the adults involved not to just exclude the children and try to protect them, but how can they maybe get them involved? How can they help them to grow their understanding? Because of course they do have much more concrete thinking about that and need to understand it in a different way. And Sonja, other thoughts about kind of how to help the youngers?
Yeah, clear, concrete language. So grandma died because she had a disease that made her heart stop working. What's a disease? Of course, there'll be lots of follow-up questions, but just being as clear and concrete as possible. Will that happen to me? Probably not right now. Most people, that doesn't happen until they're old. Being you can protect that way by being clear as well as and they may be sad for a little while. What tends to happen with younger children is, especially if it's somebody who is who would be otherwise in their life at other times, so a close family member, they may be really sad for a short time, and then of course it's not hitting them the same way because it doesn't. They aren't processing it like somebody with a more developed brain, but when they do hit that new stage of development, it's then something happens and they experience it again. So as they become like maybe a preteen, then it's like, oh, I would have done this with this person if they were alive, and I don't have them. oh, then they're sad again. And it might be like 8 years later, and you may be over it, to some extent, or you may have really worked through it in a different way, and all of a sudden your child's grieving again. Yes, I would anticipate your child will grieve more than once. As we all do, we're usually intensely sad for a while, and then okay, again, waves, but then a big family event happens, a wedding, another mile marker, and you realize once again, it's fresh once again, that this person isn't here to experience it with you. And it's a great time to say, what would you have wanted your dad to do if they were here? Well, or maybe it's a great time to bring out, I know my aunt saved several needlework things that a grandmother did and gave me one when I got married. And, since mark that somehow, include the person who's deceased in the event somehow, in a meaningful way that you guys co-create.
I like that acknowledgement kind of through those developmental stages, and kind of development is kind of like a spiral, so you go back through things again, right? And I think another piece of it is the balance that we talked about. So it's acknowledging the grief and then maybe increasing some of the kind of normal activities or opportunities to be together as, kind of the remaining folks in the family, because I think there is that fear, like, if that happened to, one parent, is that going to happen to my other parent, or who is safe, what is safe? And so having the concrete experience of being connected, surrounded by kind of love and care, even if you're not focusing on the loss, but you also need to not be denying the loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads exactly into a question that we got about someone who had a sudden death in their family and wondering what to say to their teenage daughter to help reassure her that the parents will be okay. She says, I know now she realizes that if her uncle can die, maybe her parents can die suddenly as well. I know it's always possible that something could happen, but wondering what words can be used to reassure her as best as I can.
I'm going for my with rather than protect.
Yeah.
Which is to kind of say, yes, there is that possibility, and I think, it's sad when we recognize that, and we all potentially are going to lose people that we love. And let's talk about kind of what it was that you valued about that person that was in your life. So if it was the dad, or the grandparent, or whoever it might have been, right? And this is kind of that making meaning that Sonja talked about earlier on. And then to kind of from there go, who else in your life, provides these things for you? It's not just one person, and recognizing kind of the other people in your life provide you with support and love and care, and that there's a network of there, doesn't diminish any one person's importance to you, but it can make you feel like you are more equipped to deal with the loss when it happens.
That's a really powerful way to think about it, and I appreciate that, the building their support structure, because we don't know when something will happen to us.
Right.
Yeah, my first thought is life is precious and make the most of what you have while you have it. That's a hard thing to say to a child or a teen, but you also can't make promises that you'll always be there. So you can say, my loss is unlikely until I'm older, it's unlikely, but not impossible. And know that I will love you, I love you to pieces, and will as long as I'm alive. and every moment I have with you, I consider a gift. And then by the okay, I'm sorry, I brought it up, right? But that's the reassurance that whether you're there or not, you will always love them, and that's a message they can carry with them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that you have in the chat or here live? Then thank you, Kristie and Sonja, so much for being here tonight.
Are you going to talk about that, some resources, I think, that you're gonna
Yes.
push out to folks and, let them know where they can come and get this information if they weren't able to join us this evening, all those important things?
Yes, I am sharing my screen right now. And for those here, let me put that up. We have a supporting and grieving child sheet that we put together in conjunction with the Healing Center and with the Whitake services. Well, I'll just quickly go through these. This is a curated collection from professionals, resources that they like as checked by parents to say, does it really work for me? Does it answer my questions? And I think one of our gold standards is the Whitake Center, which is a center for grief for children and families out of Portland. And they have a number of really easy to read and helpful tip sheets and activities for kids of all ages. The Healing Center, which is in our backyard in Seattle, has support groups among other offerings. And these support groups are free, so they're accessible to anyone, and they are for children of all ages, young adults. And there's more on their website about the Healing Center and the resources that they have. We have the National Alliance for Children's Grief has a really good brochure about childhood grief, just to educate yourself. Within the Lake Washington School District, if you are within the school district, there are ways to get support from the school district and affiliated services. Elementary schools, the school district itself is the provider, and you would be contacting the school counselor or the psychologist at your child's school. For middle schools and the choice middle school, high schools, youth site services, and Kristie Neklason oversees this program, has behavioral health support specialists in those schools. At the high school level, Evergreen provides social workers at the comprehensive high schools. So know that there are resources that if you are worried and you want that next step of support for your child, you can reach out to them. And also, YES offers at the high school level support groups and also programs for Latinx and Black students at some of the high schools. So there's a broad spectrum of supports out there. There are local organizations, Art with a Heart came up tonight, and links to those are here. And then we also have Balance Mind itself has a few videos that we have guests that we brought in talking about these topics that are hard to talk about and hard to know what to say about. There's a QR code that will get you access to this page, and we will also send out tomorrow to anyone who registered. So with that, thank you so much, Sonja and Kristie. I'm going to stop my share for being here tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about it.